A Nevada eviction process is formally called a summary eviction process or an unlawful detainer action. It can differ from county to county, but they all more or less follow the same process. Fill out the forms, serve the tenant, attend the trial, wait for judgment. Every eviction process is different and dependent on the information in the lease or rental agreement signed by the tenant and the landlord. It's always best to exercise meticulous file keeping to avoid errors that could be exploited by the tenant, especially history of rent payments and notices with the return receipt from the tenant. Filing an eviction action takes time and patience. It can cost a landlord way more money than it's worth. For example, merely filing a complaint in Clark County will already cost the landlord $270. Most landlords are advised to try to work things out with a tenant outside court, either by themselves or through an eviction mediation program. It's only in extreme cases when a landlord results to file for an official summary eviction process. In this video, we'll detail the summary for landlords to refer to when evicting a tenant. And for further assurance, be sure to confirm procedures and information with your justice court to make sure the entire process goes as smoothly as possible. So with that being said, let's dive in. Common eviction reasons. The first step all evictions must take is providing an eviction notice called a notice to pay or quit. There are only some states which do not require a notice to pay or quit, and even then, it depends on the reason for the eviction. The eviction notice serves to notify the tenant that they are in danger of eviction by providing the reason for eviction and how long a tenant has to pay, comply, or leave before the process begins. A landlord cannot evict any tenant without this eviction notice. In the state of Nevada, there are 4 main reasons to file for a formal eviction process: failure to pay the rent, violation of the lease or rental agreement, conducting illegal activity, non-renewal of lease at the end of the rental period. So let's go over these more in depth. Notice requirements for non-payment of rent. The most common reason for eviction is failure to pay the rent. A landlord can evict a tenant for failing to pay rent on time. Rent is considered late in Nevada a day past its due. However, a grace period to extend payment before needing a notice to pay the rent might be available if the landlord and tenant were able to include that stipulation in the lease or rental agreement. Before a landlord can start with the eviction action for failure to pay past due rent, the landlord must give the tenant a written 7-day notice to pay rent or quit. This 7-day notice to pay rent means a tenant is required to either pay rent or quit within 7 days. Notice requirements for violation of the lease or rental agreement. A rental agreement can vary depending on the tenant. It contains the responsibilities of each party during the entire duration of the tenant's stay. A tenant may face eviction for a lease violation. Landlords and tenants are required to uphold the terms of the lease at all times. The landlord can evict the tenant for a lease violation. The landlord must give them a 5-day notice to comply. This allows the tenant 5 days to cure the lease violation or move out of the rental property. An example of lease violations in Nevada include damages to the rental unit, smoking in non-smoking areas, housing a pet in a pet-free rental unit. The landlord may continue with an eviction action if the tenant remains inside the rental unit after the given notice period. Notice requirements for conducting illegal activity. In the state of Nevada, landlords have to give their tenants an eviction notice called a 3-day notice to quit before proceeding to file for a summary eviction if a tenant has engaged in illegal activity on the rental premises. An example of illegal activity includes activities involving a criminal gang, starting an illegal or unlawful business, involvement in the creation, distribution, or consumption of a controlled substance. Should the tenant remain on the rental premises after their notice period ends, the landlord may continue with filing for an unlawful detainer action. Notice requirements for non-renewal of lease after the end of the rental period. A Nevada eviction process does not allow a landlord to evict a tenant without a good cause. As long as the tenant does not violate any rules, they can stay until their rental period ends. A landlord can evict a tenant who stays in the property even a day after their written lease ends and has not arranged for renewal. This type of notice or eviction usually only applies if the landlord wants to end the tenant's lease. Should the tenant remain in the rental premises even after their notice period ends, then the landlord may continue to file an unlawful detainer action in order to get the tenant to leave the property. Filing a complaint. The next step is filing an unlawful detainer action in the correct justice court. Costs for filing may be pricey, so be ready to pay the fees. To begin a formal eviction process, a landlord must file a complaint only after the notice period has passed. Successful evictions rely on correct filings, so the landlord must file all the forms correctly. Steps in filing an eviction action. Proceed to the justice court the rental property belongs to, fill out the forms, and pay the filing cost. Timeline. It takes 3 to 30 days depending on the reason for eviction before a landlord can file a complaint. Notice to comply. Before filing for an eviction with the court, you need to issue the tenant a notice to comply. Serving the tenant. The next step in an eviction procedure is serving the summons and complaint to the tenant. The landlord must not serve the documents by themselves. The summons and its supporting documents must contain information such as the date and time of the court trial. Nevada allows a sheriff, deputy sheriff, certified process server, or individuals who are uninvolved in the case over the age of 18 to serve these documents. The time frame to serve the documents to the tenant depends on the service method. How to serve documents to a tenant. The summons and its corresponding documents must be served on the tenant through one of the following methods: personal service or substituted service. After serving the summons and complaint. In the state of Nevada, a tenant must file an answer if they wish to dispute the landlord's complaints. The tenant must attend the hearing if they wish to provide their own defense. The time they have to do this depends on the reason for eviction. Timeline. The time frame for serving the summons depends on the chosen service method. The tenant has 3 to 30 days to file their answer. A continuance can extend the process by 5 to 30 days. Asking for possession. Filing a motion to obtain judgment and get a judgment for possession. To win and accomplish this step, landlords have to provide a strong argument backed up by solid evidence against the tenant. Should the tenant fail to show up to the hearing or abide with the order to show cause, the landlord may win by default. The tenant may appeal the judgment within 10 days from the time judgment for possession was issued by the court in favor of the landlord. Next procedure if the tenant disagreed and filed an answer. Filing an answer is necessary for an eviction hearing to be held or scheduled. Should the tenant be unable to attend the hearing, the judge may issue a default judgment in favor of the landlord. This means the tenant must move out of the property. However, if both parties are present, the landlord has to support their claim with evidence and show it to the judge. This includes, but is not limited by the following: copy of the deed and the lease or rental agreement, bank statements, witness statements, photo and video documentation of the violations committed by the tenant. The judicial officer may also issue an order to show cause that requires the tenant to lay out their own defense. This order to show cause may extend the eviction process. Timeline. A hearing for an eviction action is scheduled as early as 7 days depending on the availability of the justice courts. Getting possession. After the landlord wins the case and gets an order for removal. The order for removal is a court order that informs the tenant that the tenant must move out of their housing on the property. If the tenant fails to do so, they will be forcibly evicted. Once the landlord wins the case, and provided the tenant does not file for an appeal or reconsideration, the court will issue an order for removal immediately after the court rules in the landlord's favor. However, the issuance for the order for removal is extended to 5 business days for evictions where the tenant fails to pay rent. If the tenant pays all past due rent within these 5 days, the entire summary eviction process is stopped. Move out process. The final step in the eviction process is to move the tenant out of the property. Nevada law dictates that a tenant has 24 to 36 hours to vacate the property before they will be removed if their eviction is about non-payment of rent. There is no specific time frame for law enforcement officers to evict a tenant for other types of reasons. Only the appropriate authorities are allowed to remove the tenant by force. Even if the landlord wins the case, they cannot engage in illegal methods of eviction. Timeline. A tenant has 24 to 36 hours to leave the rental premises from the moment the order of removal is delivered to them, if the eviction was about non-payment of rent. Nevada eviction timeline. It takes an average of 1 week to 6 weeks for a complete summary eviction action. Showing evidence. Eviction hearings are scheduled in court as soon as 7 days after the tenant files their answer. How to keep good records. If the tenant disagrees with the eviction request and they reply to the court, it's very important that you keep extremely good records of everything so you can provide proof to the judge and win your case. This part can make or break your entire eviction request in the event of a dispute. You can stay organized by keeping a physical paper trail, scanning documents, backups, and property management software. Evidence to show for not paying rent. If the tenant doesn't pay rent and they dispute that claim, it's important that you show the judge the following: your lease agreement, all payments, all payment returns, and all messages. Evidence to show for lease violations if you are evicting the tenant for lease violations. For example, noise complaints, unauthorized pets, or property damages. It's important to show proof from any of the following methods: security cameras, videos and photos, and the lease terms. And that's a wrap for today's video on the Nevada eviction process. We truly hope you found this video informative and insightful. But hold on, there's still more to uncover about the eviction process in Nevada. If you want to explore this topic further, we've got you covered. In the description below, you'll find a link to a detailed blog post that dives deep into the eviction process in the state of Nevada. It covers everything from notice requirements to legal proceedings and tenant rights and landlord responsibilities. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Take care, and we'll see you in the next one.